It's going to be okay with you guys if I cry this morning? Because I might. Not even sure why at this point. Other than I'm going to be, I scare myself when I do this, but I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes I don't feel like preaching. I don't know. I'm in a place in my life where I can go from great joy and seeing the goodness of God to me and the family that He's given me and the blessings that He's given me with my job here and other things. And oh gosh, other times I just can go to dark places in my head. And all week long, I go to dark places in other people's heads too. And if God's not with me, and if God's not with us, there's no hope. And so I guess that song was just kind of hitting me in a fresh way, and I was kind of sitting there thinking, I really don't feel like preaching right now. And I especially don't feel like talking about depression right now. I'm supposed to have a barbecue today. It's a fun day. Who's the idiot that planned those two at the same time? You guys are looking at him. Just a little oversight. So, yeah, you guessed it. Depression. Yeah, guys, it's just, I don't know. It's just coming from a raw place right now. I mean, I led a service for a guy who committed suicide a few weeks ago. And that stuck with me. And this past week, guy I went to Bible college with, guy who was in my wedding party, one of my groomsmen. I was in his wedding party. Found out over a year ago that he left his ministry, left his wife, left his 9-year-old daughter, and ran off with another woman. And I reached out to his wife at the time because I know both of them, and I said, I'm really sorry. And I said, there's anything I can do. I'm praying for you guys. And I said, hey, can you tell me where he's at with things? What's going on? I tried to reach out, didn't hear anything back. And she said he doesn't think he believes in God anymore. And if he does believe in God, he doesn't want God's forgiveness at all. So he's probably never going to respond to you. And then this week, through a variety of circumstances, I happened to find out that he's under investigation for allegedly sexually assaulting someone years before even his divorce played out. And went to Bible college with him, sat in Bible classes with him, was, like I said earlier, in his wedding. He was in our wedding. He's just completely written off the whole thing as far as Christianity is concerned. And that's not just one guy. I mean, I know several people who are in that category. And sometimes I'm afraid that perhaps I could be in that category, that I could walk away. And in those moments of darkness, when it's like God doesn't exist, I can wrestle pretty deeply with those types of fears. But the one thing I can't seem to get away from is what we just finished singing about. If God's not with us and He's not merciful and gracious, we're all in big, big trouble. We're all in big, big, big trouble. And so then truth comes through a song or through his word or through one of you to me. Came through Don's Sunday school class this morning to me and reminds me that he's here, that he is who he claims to be, and that he's actually interested in me and interested in you and cares. And for all the darkness in the human heart, he has and he gives light. He gives light. That's what that song is about from Psalm 46. I mean, in the Old Testament, they didn't know the gospel yet. They didn't know all the details of Jesus yet. And yet they understood if we have any hope at all in this world, it has to be a sovereign God, a big, powerful God. And the fulfillment of what's mentioned in Psalm 46 is Jesus coming and not just winning the wars on the outside, not just winning the wars with other nations, but winning the war within. O God, who knows the hearts of men, and still you let them live. Did you hear that? He knows what's inside of us. And we're still here. Is that amazing? It's pretty amazing when you see how dark and ugly and disgusting it can be in there. And when you know that at root of all is us saying to our Maker, you know what? I'm going it alone. I don't need you. I don't want you. He knows the hearts of men, and he still lets us live. And that's the war Jesus had to win there at that level. And the gospel tells us triumphantly, victoriously, he won. He won. And I don't know of any other philosophy or religion or worldview that has anything that even holds a candle to that message. Do you? I don't know of anything. So we're going to talk about depression this morning, and I'm going to start with some details from the psychological community, which I'm more and more reading the best of what they have to say and the latest resources that are out there. I'm reading tons of it, having to for school, but I'm also interested in it. I like reading about it. I like seeing what they have to say and how they plan to help people and what that looks like. And I do think that it has some helpful aspects, but also falls short in some really important ways that highlight for us the glory of the gospel. So that's where we're heading. If I can emotionally hold it together enough to get us through this, that's where we're going. What is depression? A condition of general emotional dejection, withdrawal, sadness greater than or more prolonged than that warranted by any objective reason. So in the psychological community, they say, hey, look, this is a condition of a person who doesn't really have a good reason to be down, or they don't have a reason to be down to the extent they are down. That would be considered depression, clinical depression, similar depression so severe as to be considered abnormal, either because of no obvious environmental causes or because the reaction to unfortunate life circumstances is more intense or prolonged than would generally be expected. So that same idea. Just a couple statistics here. They refer to as the common cold of psychotherapy. So common. In fact, they say it's on the rise, which is interesting. And they're trying to figure out, why is it on the rise? Is it because we're studying this now and we're more aware of it? Or is it on the rise because of certain cultural factors? The way our society is these days, and even things like social media and all the forms of narcissism that are so prevalent, and how that just actually has us spiraling worse into depression. Could be inactivity, isolation, things we talked about in Sunday school this morning, as completely detrimental to our well-being, and yet never more available because of the ease of life these days. We don't have to work to survive, and so we can just sit around and be stuck in our own heads. So anyway, research shows that 50% of people report seasons of depression throughout their lives, and we would say, wouldn't we, that really it's 100%. At some point, we all experience depression in this world because it's dark, it's broken, some horrible things that go on down here. So really we could say 100%, but in terms of a clinical type of depression, they would say that's more closer to 50%. 10% report regular feelings of depression. 3.4% suffer from major depression or would be considered clinically depressed. And then this is interesting. Having close relatives who battle depression makes you 2 to 3 times more likely to experience it. So there's a familial connection, and that's not really surprising either. just going to kind of move quickly through these, just a smattering of facts, okay? Depression is characterized by, and if you experience it, you know this, low energy, difficulty sleeping, changes in eating habits, difficulty concentrating, low self-esteem, loss of interest, motivation, ambition, thoughts of death or suicide, little to no eye contact, head down, speaking slowly or monotone. So these are just some of the sort of indicators that someone is depressed. And again, some of you have experienced it, some of you haven't. I understand this morning that not all of you battle depression, and that's something to be thankful for if you don't. Some of you would say, hey, I'm too busy to be depressed. And others of you would say, well, I'm so stinking busy, it's depressing. And so that depresses me, right? So there's all sorts of people, right? And we all experience life differently. But sometimes when it hits hard, this is what it can be like for people. There's a darkness. You see the commercials on TV for all the different antidepressants. And there's the cloud over the guy's head, right? Everywhere he goes, there's that cloud. That's what it can feel like. And these are some of the indicators of it. And there's this cycle that happens. And this is fascinating. I wish I could spend more time on this. But there's this cycle that we can get stuck in our minds. And we can go from depressed feelings to inactivity and avoidance, self-condemnation, talked about that earlier, depressive rumination, social withdrawal, self-medication, self-neglect, this cycle. And it can go all different directions, but it's just this pattern that we can get stuck in. And sometimes be active and going about our day and going about our business and taking care of the kids and running from here to there, but yet there's this going through our head all the time. And it's dark, and it's hopeless, and it's ugly. And other times it's just, man, you're just down for the count with this, and this stuff's just going through your mind. And you think, well, I just got to stay away from, I'm going to avoid all the circumstances, all the activities, all the people that contribute or trigger my depression. And guess what happens? It gets worse. It just gets worse. The more we try to save ourselves, the worse it gets. Most psychiatrists today believe that depression is caused by low levels of the chemical serotonin. So it's an important reason I'm including this. First of all, notice the word believe. They believe that's the case. In other words, they're saying your body causes depression. It comes from your body. And right away, that probably strikes you as odd and not quite right. And I would agree with you on that. And interestingly, even the psychological community is questioning that. And so I read another resource recently, but another resource, more recent studies, finding it's not clear whether the biochemical process causes depression or the depression causes a change in the biochemical process. It's far from an established scientific fact that biological processes can cause depression. So even they don't know. They know something's going on in your brain. There's chemicals in there, serotonin and others that relate to your mood and the regulation of your mood. But they don't know for sure what came first, chicken or the egg. Is it the way you think that then leads to those chemicals going haywire, or is it the chemicals first? And I think from a biblical perspective, and we're kind of going here in a minute, but from a biblical perspective, we'd say, as the man thinks in his heart, so is he, right? Has everything to do with how we think and how we understand the realities of our lives. Everything to do with it. Right? And there's all sorts of medications today, which are also more common. Some of you are well aware of this. I'm sure people in here are on antidepressants, and it's very common these days. And there can be a helpfulness to balancing out serotonin levels and things like that. 13% of the general population is currently taking antidepressants, and that's as of a couple of years ago. Look at this one. The rate of antidepressant use in the last 2 decades is up approximately 400%. This is fascinating too. In the age of enlightenment, we're more and more trusting in human thinking and the scientific community, and yet we're more depressed than ever. Isn't that interesting? We have all these human authorities, and they're impressive with their degrees and their lab coats and everything else, and we're more depressed than ever. And we've got all these medications and all these options, and yet, I think this is what's helping me so much, is it just cries out for our Creator. We need help. We need help more than just popping a pill. And so to transition us, a couple of thoughts that came from a resource I was reading recently. Again, completely secular. But these thoughts made me think about the gospel. First of all, look at this one. Thinking deeply about who you are, what you're feeling, and what might be causing it isn't always helpful. In fact, doing so can often be harmful if your goal is to overcome depression. thinking about it, trying to figure it out, can actually make things worse. Since the garden, our main problem is that we want to be the authority and listen to our own authority. And guess what happens as a result of that? We suffer as a result of that. We suffer. When we think, I know what I'm doing here, I got this understood, I don't need any help, I don't need any input, I got this, we suffer. Our authority isn't trustworthy. Our minds aren't trustworthy. That's why, as we read earlier in Sunday school, it says in Proverbs 3, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. You can't lean the weight of your life on your understanding. Your understanding can't hold up the weight of your life. You cannot possibly be at peace and mentally healthy, spiritually healthy, by just constantly listening to yourself and the thoughts that just go through your head every day. You can't trust yourself. Which again, sort of cries out for another authority. I need information from someone else, somewhere else. And it says in Proverbs, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of what? Of wisdom. We need him. Look at this one. Research has shown that adopting a non-judgmental stance toward your painful thoughts and feelings can actually help your mood. Do you know of any voices that are loud and clear that say, I don't condemn you? That judgment has been taken away from you. That's what the gospel tells us, doesn't it? It does. So that's where we're going. First, I want you to look at Job with me, okay? To see, and let me just say as we start here, Job. Depending on how much experience you have with this book, you may or may not know, this book is not rated G. It is not rated G. And it's a good thing that it's not. This book is very honest about the dark, difficult, dreadful realities of this world and the dark, difficult, dreadful realities of our hearts, isn't it? It's very honest. And I want to look at Job and show you a couple things. If you know the story of Job, you know that through circumstances in his life, he went through immense suffering and deep depression. And really, any one of us are basically one phone call, one text message away from similar, okay, in our lives. And here's what it says in Job 2. This is interesting because we often, in the church, because we're trying to sterilize everything in a kind of artificial way, we often paint these pictures of stained glass saints, like Job was a stained glass saint, but he's not. And if you haven't heard, Don's got some great material on the book of Job that maybe we'll share from the pulpit at some point soon. But Don has delved into this humanity of Job, the reality of Job, and the fragility of Job, and the struggle of Job. And we see an indication of that right up front after everything is unfolded and his children have been killed and all of his assets have been taken away from him and he's lost everything. And his wife says to him, hey, curse God and die. And yet in Job 2 verse 10 it says this, in all this Job did not sin with his lips. And so people stop there and say, see, Job was this godly man. He always had a great reaction to everything. He was fully submissive, or maybe that's the implication. That's kind of the implication that I inferred from what I heard, okay? Maybe that's an unfair assessment of the situation, but that's what I felt like I was hearing about it. And yet, you know what's fascinating is you continue reading. Chapter 3, verse 1, just a few verses later. Afterward, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And the word for mouth there is actually from the same Hebrew root as the word for lips in verse 10 of chapter 2. It's saying, for a time, Job was quiet and he was in shock and he did worship and he sort of laid himself out and worshiped. But then, over time, guess what started to happen? The darkness of his heart started to come out. The rebellion started to come out and he started to curse his very existence. And by doing so, basically cursing God, questioning God. So let's look at it a little bit. Let's listen to what happens, what comes out of Job's mouth. Chapter 3, verse 1. Afterward, Job opened his mouth, cursed the day of his birth, and he said, "Let the day perish on which I was to be born, and the night which said, a boy is conceived. May that day be darkness. Let not God above care for it, nor light shine on it. Let darkness and black and gloom claim it. Let a cloud settle on it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful shout enter it. Let those curse it who curse the day, who are prepared to rouse with Leviathan. Let the stars of its twilight be darkened. Let it wait for light, but have none. And let it not see the breaking dawn, because it did not shut the opening of my mother's womb or hide trouble from my eyes." How many times does he refer to darkness and blackness there? Do you think Job understood depression? I mean, he is explaining it in vivid detail here. Deep, deep struggle in a fallen, broken world. This is God giving us the portrait of this is a human heart. This is the human heart when things are taken away. Jump ahead. Just one little section here. Verse 20 through 26. Why is light given to him who suffers, and life to the bitter of soul, who long for death, but there is none, and dig for it more than for hidden treasures, who rejoice greatly and exult when they find the grave? Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, and whom God has hedged in? For my groaning comes at the sight of my food, and my cries pour out like water. For what I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I am not at rest, but turmoil comes. I mean, here's a guy who understands suffering. In the darkness of life in this world, he's saying, why did God even allow me to be born? I wish I wasn't even born into this place. I want nothing to do with this place. He says, I'm not at ease, I'm not quiet. I'm in turmoil. You know that feeling of turmoil within, when there's just no contentment. Nothing is right according to our standard of rightness for our lives. And what Job was wrestling with, and this is so important, is what we all wrestle with when we are depressed. Well, that's just some kind of ongoing low-grade depression you experience throughout your life, or some kind of real intense episode of it. Here's what's at root of it. What Ed Welch says in his book on depression, which is a great book, I recommend it to you. God is over all things, and nothing happens apart from his knowledge and will. By the time suffering or depression comes to our doorstep, God did it. We could just stop there, chew on that for a while. If this book is true, if Job's testimony is true, if God is sovereign, he's in control, guess what? If you're depressed, God did it. If I'm depressed, God did it. I mean, reckon with that. Does that make you mad? Kind of makes me mad sometimes. At the deepest level, if you're honest, you struggle with who God made you to be. What he made you look like. What abilities he gave you or didn't give you. The family that you were brought up in. Or the lack of family. You're mad at him, right? I get it. I am too sometimes. Job was. It forces us to reckon with this. God did it. God did it. Now what? So now what? I mean, if we stop there, it could be pretty depressing. We could end our depression message on a depressing note, but we won't do that. We'll keep going. God is involved with our depression, okay? He's involved with it. Number two, God understands our depression and rescues us from it. Turn to Mark 15. This is Mark 15 is Mark's account of the darkest event of Jesus' life. Verse 33 to 39. When the 6th hour came, darkness fell over the whole land until the ninth hour. At the ninth hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they began saying, behold, he's calling out for Elijah. Someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him as a drink, saying, let us see whether Elijah will come and take him down. And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. Stop there. My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus, in that moment, is experiencing a godless existence. And it is immense suffering. And as a fitting illustration of that, the whole world went dark for those hours that he was on the cross. This is what man would be left with. This is what man deserves for saying, to his credit, I'm going to go on my own. This is what we deserve, is a godless existence. For God to say, okay, fine, I'll leave you that way. But instead we have a God who intrudes, who comes. He keeps coming and coming and coming and coming. From the Garden of Eden, when he went looking for Adam and Eve, to your life and my life, when he comes for us and rescues us. He says, I sent my son to experience that darkness, to absorb all the penalty for human sin, to absorb the condemnation, to take it upon himself so that you can know that you're in the Creator's love forever. He felt the darkness at the deepest levels. Man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And that wasn't the end of the story. What happened on the cross there 3 days later? What happens? God raises him. His Father raises him from the dead to indicate he has conquered death. He has solved man's biggest problem on the spiritual level and on the physical level. He gives life. I think of this psalm, weeping may last the night, but a shout of joy comes in the morning. So it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be depressed sometimes. God knows you are. He sees it. And even the aspect of that comes out of sheer rebellion, he is covered. He's provided for. He's absorbed. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. He took the sting out of death for you and for me. And he promises us life. And along with that life, catch this, the gift of joy. Joy is a gift. Everybody in this world, including you and me, are frantically trying to find joy in something here, some experience here, some material thing here, some position here, some job title here, some relationship here. We're just looking. And I'm sad to say, even as believers, even as we've walked with God for a while, we're still looking, aren't we? And God says, joy is a gift of my grace to you. It's a byproduct of knowing your Creator and being in relationship with him. John 15, one of my favorite passages in the Bible. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. And a little bit later he says, these things, referring back to everything he's just said, these things I have spoken to you so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be made full. Here's the problem. We don't want the gift of joy. We want to produce joy. We want to earn joy. We want to manufacture joy. And so we keep trying and we get stuck in our own head. And even that whole rumination process is like just trying to somehow find joy inside of me or in my circumstances or what I can get for myself. To no avail. God says joy is a gift. It's a gift of grace. It's a byproduct of knowing him. It's a byproduct of being humbled by him and realizing that I can't trust myself. And even my depressive thinking isn't trustworthy. It's not accurate. It's not true. The lie is enslaved, right? And the truth sets free. It's not true. I'm going to close with this. This is a quote from the Daredevil television show that Jill and I watched on Netflix, which I would not recommend to you for certain reasons. Uh, but there's some profound ideas in the show. And at one point in the season finale, the one of the characters said this: "A hero isn't someone who lives above us, keeping us safe. A hero is not a god or an idea. A hero lives here on the street, among us, with us, always here but rarely recognized." And I heard that. Guess who I thought of? Jesus. The irony is, though that person is kind of slighting the idea of God, we need a God who walks among us. And that's the kind of God we have. And as I said to you as I opened the message this morning, I don't know of any other God, any other concept of a God who does that, who tastes Job's depression and yours and mine. Who actually has mercy, who cares. I was reading Exodus last week where it says, "I have looked upon your affliction and I'm coming to set you free." It's just awesome. Awesome. Because of where we can be stuck, isn't it? That's the kind of God that we have and the kind of God that we need, right? Yeah. Let's close in prayer. God, thank you for the few minutes that we had to think about these things. And God, I'm sorry that my heart and mind can go to dark places, and I know that so much that has to do with overlooking you and your kindness to me and all the great things you've done for me, even on the physical level of just the family I have and the health that I've had and so many other things. And then on the deeper level, Lord, just the assurance of your forgiveness, the assurance of the fact that you don't condemn me are such gifts to me. And I'm sorry that I don't always grasp nor appreciate those gifts. And I know I pray on behalf of my brothers and sisters here as well who feel similar ways sometimes in their lives. And God, I ask that you would please continue graciously pursuing us and working in our lives and teaching us and showing us what is true and rescuing us from the lies in our heads. I pray that as we learn from you, that we would be able to come alongside of each other and encourage and help each other. If there are people in here this morning who came in depressed, that those of us who are not would be able to come alongside and graciously help, be expressions of your help. God, would you please raise up a community here that's more and more in touch with reality, in touch with some of these dark aspects of our condition, and also, and most importantly, in touch with your gospel and your truth and your life and your light and your hope. God, we ask you to do what you alone can do, and we thank you that it is all up to you and that we're in your hands. It's not up to us. And in this moment, we put our trust in you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.